In the quiet isolation of the Colorado wilderness, where the forest holds its mysteries and survival depends on instinct, a tiny golden retriever puppy is left abandoned, struggling to survive. But in nature, the unexpected happens, and sometimes the wild breaks its own rules. Enter the Canada lynx, fierce, elusive, and not known for showing compassion. Yet what unfolds next is a breathtaking twist that no one, human or animal, could have foreseen. How far will this wild mother go for a creature that isn't her own? What force can unite predator and prey in an unbreakable bond? This isn't just a story of survival. It's a story of heart, of instinct, and of a connection that changes everything. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Also turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any new stories. The Colorado wilderness had never seemed so vast and desolate to Jack Thompson as it did on this particular autumn morning. At 68 years old, the retired park ranger had spent most of his life surrounded by the quiet majesty of the Rocky Mountain forests. Yet today, as the first light of dawn filtered through the ponderosa pines outside his cabin, he felt an unfamiliar restlessness. Jack's weathered hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee as he gazed at the mountain ridge that had been his backdrop for the past 15 years. His retirement cabin stood at the edge of Roosevelt National Forest, a sanctuary he had once patrolled and protected. These days, his guardianship extended only to the occasional injured bird or the vegetable garden he tended behind his modest home. "Looks like rain's coming, Rusty," he muttered to the aging chocolate Labrador sprawled across the worn rug by the fireplace. Rusty lifted his graying muzzle in acknowledgement, then returned to his morning doze. Jack smiled at his loyal companion. At 12 years old, Rusty had slowed considerably, but their bond had only deepened with time. Together, man and dog had weathered life's storms. The death of Jack's wife, Margaret, 7 years ago, his subsequent retirement, and their relocation to this remote cabin, where healing could finally begin. The forecast had predicted storms for the next 3 days, so Jack knew it was time to check his emergency supplies and bring in extra firewood. Setting his coffee down, he slipped into his jacket and work boots. "I'll be back soon, old boy," he said, patting Rusty's head. "Just going to make sure we're set for the storm." Outside, the autumn air was biting, a sharp reminder that winter's touch was just around the corner. Jack's breath formed small clouds that drifted and dissolved into the crisp morning air as he made his way to the woodshed. The usual rustle of leaves, the call of birds, and the chirp of small creatures seemed absent, leaving behind an eerie silence. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something unknown. Jack had spent most of his life in the wilderness, and over the years, he had developed a keen awareness of the forest's moods. Today, however, something felt different. There was an unsettling stillness that hung in the air, a heaviness that gnawed at him. As Jack began stacking the logs into his wheelbarrow, a faint sound tickled his ears. It was so soft, he almost missed it, so delicate that it could have been the wind whispering through the trees. He paused, listening more intently. There it was again, a high-pitched cry, soft and weak but unmistakable. It sounded almost like a puppy's whimper, which confused him. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles down the mountain, and they didn't have any dogs. His brow furrowed as a sense of urgency crept up his spine. Abandoning his task, Jack set the half-filled wheelbarrow aside and began following the sound. The cry grew louder, clearer, almost desperate as it echoed through the trees, and Jack quickened his pace. He moved cautiously, trying not to disturb the forest too much. The sound continued, guiding him to the edge of the property. He approached the tree line, his eyes scanning the terrain for the source of the noise, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt a deep instinctive pull to investigate, even though he couldn't explain why. Every step he took seemed to intensify the sense that something, or someone, was in need. The blue pickup truck rumbled along the narrow Forest Service road, its engine sputtering as it struggled against the rough terrain. Inside, the man behind the wheel was gripped by a palpable sense of dread and anxiety. His hands were slick with sweat as they gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes bloodshot and wide with exhaustion. He glanced at the small canvas duffel bag in the passenger seat, which shifted occasionally, accompanied by faint whimpers. It was clear that whatever, or whoever, was inside, didn't belong there. "Shut up already," the man muttered, his voice strained. He jabbed his finger at the bag, as if his anger could somehow quell the quiet cries coming from within. "Almost there," he added, though his words lacked conviction. The truck's tires crunched on the gravel road as they reached a small turnout. The man slammed on the brakes, bringing the vehicle to a halt. He stared out the windshield for a moment, looking as if he were reconsidering his actions, but only for a brief second. The engine fell silent. With a resigned sigh, he grabbed the duffel bag and swung it onto his shoulder. The small creature inside squirmed more vigorously, its muffled cries becoming louder, more insistent. The man's hands were shaking as he unzipped the bag. He glanced around nervously, making sure no one could see him, before dumping its contents onto the forest floor. A tiny golden retriever puppy, no more than 8 weeks old, tumbled out and immediately began to shiver. The puppy's coat was matted, its body too thin from hunger, its eyes wide and trusting, still innocent of the cruelty that had just befallen it. "This is your stop, mutt," the man said in a cold, detached voice, his words sharp with the sting of abandonment. "Can't afford to feed you, and the shelter wants $80 to take you. This is better for both of us." The puppy looked up at him with confused, trusting eyes, its tiny tail wagging hesitantly. The man sneered. "Don't look at me like that," he muttered, backing away from the puppy and already moving back toward the truck. He slammed the door shut with a sense of finality. "Some hiker will find you, or maybe you'll." The words trailed off, too grim to say aloud. The truck's engine roared to life, and the man quickly drove away, leaving the puppy behind. As the truck faded into the distance, the little golden retriever puppy was left trembling, alone, lost in a vast, unfamiliar wilderness. Not far from where the tiny golden retriever puppy huddled beneath a fallen log, shivering from cold and hunger, a Canada lynx emerged from her den beneath a rocky overhang. Her tawny coat blended seamlessly with the earth-toned hues of the forest, the faint stripes and spots a perfect camouflage for her environment. At 3 years old, she was in her prime, an experienced and skilled predator, her compact body honed by years of navigating the rugged mountain terrain. The lynx stretched with grace, the muscles of her lithe frame rippling under her thick fur as she yawned, adjusting her posture to greet the twilight hours. Behind her, 3 small kittens played near the den, their tiny mews rising above the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. Born in early summer, they were now large enough to venture outside their den and begin learning the skills necessary for survival. Yet, they still relied on their mother for sustenance and protection. The lynx's ears twitched to the sound of their calls, but it was another noise that caught her attention, an unfamiliar cry that sparked a deep, primal response within her. It was faint but distinct, drawing her toward it. The cry stirred memories of a similar incident a week earlier when one of her kittens had wandered off, only to return weak and frightened after a long day's absence. The sound triggered a reflexive urge to protect. She moved silently through the underbrush, her powerful legs propelling her forward with stealth. As she approached the source of the cry, her whiskers vibrated in the still air. She paused, assessing the scents that drifted on the wind. This wasn't the musky scent of another lynx, but something different. Instinct told her to either retreat or hunt, but the persistent cry, a cry filled with desperation, pulled at her in a way that defied the usual rules of predator and prey. By the second morning of the puppy's abandonment, it had grown significantly weaker. The dehydration had begun to take its toll, and without the ability to find food or water, the puppy's energy had drained away. What had started as frantic, high-pitched cries had now turned into occasional weak whimpers, barely audible against the stillness of the forest. The small creature lay beneath the fallen log, its once soft honey-colored coat now tangled with pine needles and dirt, its tiny body too exhausted to move. Every now and then, its tail would twitch, but even that seemed an effort. As the pale light of dawn filtered through the trees, the puppy's ears perked up at the sound of approaching footsteps, soft, stealthy, but unmistakably close. Too weak to flee, it could only lift its head, watching through half-lidded eyes as a shadow fell across the entrance to its shelter. Standing in the clearing was the Canada lynx, her amber eyes fixed on the tiny creature before her. The puppy's heart fluttered weakly in its chest as it recognized the predator's gaze, yet it offered a weak whimper, its tail attempting to wag despite its weakness. The lynx's nostrils flared as she processed the scent of the small animal before her. Her instincts told her this was no prey, no rabbit or bird to chase and capture, but something different. A human scent lingered on the puppy, reminding her of the creatures she had learned to avoid. Yet, as the puppy let out another feeble cry and weakly wagged its tail, the lynx felt something stir within her, something unexpected. It was as if the small creature before her reminded her of her own kittens, so young and vulnerable. Her maternal instincts overrode the usual wariness she felt around unfamiliar creatures. With cautious precision, the lynx stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate. Her sharp claws flexed, but her expression softened as she bent down to grip the scruff of the puppy's neck in her mouth, just as she would one of her own kittens. The puppy, too weak to resist, went limp in her jaws, instinctively responding to the familiar touch. In that moment, the predator became protector. With her precious cargo secured, the lynx turned and vanished into the undergrowth, her body moving with fluid grace, carrying the puppy away from danger, toward the safety of her den. The mother Canada lynx arrived at her rocky den, where her 3 playful kittens greeted her with eager mews. Their spotted fur shimmered in the soft light of the late afternoon as they circled her legs, looking up with wide, innocent blue-gold eyes. The lynx carefully laid the exhausted puppy on the soft grass that lined their den, the cool ground providing a contrast to the warmth of the lynx's protective presence. The kittens hesitated, curious but cautious of the strange creature that now occupied their home. The puppy, weakened from days of exposure and hunger, struggled to its feet and, though unsteady, wagged its tail weakly. The small, golden retriever puppy had little experience with wild animals, but in its naive desperation, it sought out warmth and companionship, hoping that these new creatures would provide what it lacked: food, care, and safety. The lynx's kittens, still too young to fully understand the implications of their mother's actions, approached the puppy tentatively, their small paws reaching out to nudge and bat at the strange creature. Their movements were playful, not threatening, as they poked and prodded at the puppy's tired body. The mother lynx watched over them closely, her sharp amber eyes never leaving the scene, ready to intervene if the situation escalated. When the puppy, too exhausted to remain upright, collapsed again, the lynx slowly padded toward it. With careful precision, she began to groom the puppy's dirty, matted coat with her rough tongue, a gesture of care that was reserved for her own young. The puppy, instinctively understanding the protection it was being given, lay still under her ministrations. By nightfall, the strange new family huddled together for warmth, the lynx's purring body creating a comforting vibration that lulled the puppy into a deep, much-needed sleep. However, as the third morning dawned, reality began to assert itself. The mother Canada lynx had caught a rabbit, its scent still fresh and the flesh warm with vitality. The 3 kittens immediately began to devour it, their sharp claws tearing at the meat. The puppy, desperate for sustenance, tried to join in but struggled to eat the raw meat. Its digestive system, unaccustomed to the ways of the wild, could not process the food. It tried to suckle from the lynx, but the physical differences were too vast, and the puppy's pitiful attempts failed. The mother Canada lynx paced back and forth at the entrance to her den, her tail flicking in frustration. The attachment she felt to the tiny puppy was undeniable, but the reality of the situation weighed heavily on her. Her instincts told her that this alien creature did not belong in her care, and yet, something deep within her pulled her to protect it. Her own kittens were growing quickly, needing more of her attention and care, and she couldn't afford to waste energy on a creature that was not of her kind. Her maternal instincts warred with the harsh truth of survival in the wild. By the time dawn broke over the forest, the mother lynx had made up her mind. The puppy, now weaker than ever, could not stay. Despite the attachment she felt, she had to let go of the fragile creature. With one last lingering look at her kittens, she gently grabbed the puppy by the scruff of its neck once again, just as she had when she first brought it to the den. The puppy, too weak to protest, let out a faint whimper but went limp in her mouth. She carried it with a grace that belied the situation, moving swiftly through the dense underbrush toward the edge of the forest, where the scent of humans occasionally drifted. The mother lynx did not venture deeper into the wilderness, for there was no chance the puppy would survive there. Instead, she headed toward the borders where human presence was more likely, hoping, in some unspoken way, that someone would find the puppy. Meanwhile, Jack Thompson, a seasoned ranger, had been searching the forest for over an hour. The cries had stopped abruptly, leaving him with a sense of unease. He had pushed deeper into the woods than he originally planned, his instincts telling him that something was wrong. Dark storm clouds had gathered overhead, signaling an impending change in the weather. He knew he should turn back, but something, whether his experience or simply human compassion, compelled him to continue. "Hello," he called into the stillness of the forest, knowing it was a long shot, but hoping to hear anything that might guide him to the source of the cries. The only response was the whisper of wind through the pines. Just as Jack was beginning to doubt his decision, he heard a familiar sound, a bark. His old Labrador, Rusty, had joined the search despite his arthritic hips. Rusty was barking urgently, his tail wagging as he pointed Jack toward a distant part of the forest. Jack's heart raced. He wasn't sure what they would find, but something was drawing them in. Jack Thompson's heart raced as he heard his old Labrador, Rusty, bark excitedly from ahead. The dog's stance was rigid, his tail stiff and pointed toward the forest. Jack recognized the familiar pointer posture and quickened his pace, the hairs on the back of his neck standing at attention. "What is it, boy?" he called out, his voice low and calm to avoid spooking whatever had caught Rusty's attention. As Jack approached, he squinted toward a small clearing where he saw a tawny shape moving slowly through the underbrush. His first instinct was a mountain lion, and he instinctively reached for the pepper spray strapped to his waist. But as he got closer, the shape became clearer. It wasn't a mountain lion. It was much smaller, with a distinct feline build, wild and sleek, its tawny coat marked with distinctive spots and stripes. It was a Canada lynx, and Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him, although he remained alert. What struck him more than the lynx's presence was what it was carrying. In the lynx's gentle grip was a small, golden retriever puppy, barely moving, its small body limp but still breathing. Jack froze, careful not to make a sound. Rusty stood beside him, eerily calm, his earlier excitement quelled by the intense stillness of the moment. Years of experience had taught Jack when to act and when to observe, and this was one of those rare moments that called for the latter. The lynx, moving with deliberate care, paused at the edge of the clearing. Its unblinking amber eyes locked onto Jack's, studying him. After a long moment, the lynx set the puppy down on a patch of moss, giving it a quick, protective grooming lick before backing away, still watching Jack. "Well, I'll be damned," Jack whispered to himself. He stood motionless, his mind racing to process the surreal sight before him. The bond between the wild cat and the abandoned puppy was unmistakable, and Jack could only wonder about the strange circumstances that had brought them together. Jack knelt slowly, his legs stiff from crouching, and extended his hand palm down in a calm, non-threatening gesture. The lynx remained still, its amber eyes never leaving his face. The wild cat's gaze alternated between him and the abandoned puppy, the air thick with tension as Jack tried to decipher the lynx's intentions. He spoke softly, more to himself than to the lynx. "You're bringing it to me," Jack murmured, realization slowly dawning in his mind. "Aren't you, Mama?" The lynx's ear twitched in acknowledgement, though it did not approach. Jack had spent enough time in the wild to understand animal behavior, and this interaction was no coincidence. The wild cat had made a deliberate decision to bring the puppy to him. Something in the lynx's gaze told Jack that it was asking for help, its maternal instincts guiding it to offer the puppy to someone who could save it. He remained perfectly still, sensing the delicate nature of the situation. The lynx's movements were controlled, her decisions calculated, and Jack respected that. The lynx seemed to make a final judgment, her amber eyes flickering for a moment as she assessed Jack's sincerity and calm. Then, without a sound, she turned and moved into the underbrush, blending into the forest as though she had never been there at all. Only then did Jack move toward the small, golden retriever puppy. He knelt beside it, his heart heavy with the weight of its fragile condition. It was a miracle that the puppy was still breathing. Dehydrated and malnourished, it barely responded, its small body weak and unsteady. As Jack gently lifted the puppy, it managed a faint lick of his hand, its survival instinct still alive. Jack smiled softly, tucking the puppy carefully inside his jacket to keep it warm. "You're safe now, little one," Jack whispered, his voice filled with quiet determination. "Let's get you home." Back at his secluded cabin, Jack worked quickly and methodically to save the tiny puppy. He had experienced countless wildlife rescues in his career, but this situation felt different. The bond he had witnessed between the mother lynx and the puppy was unlike anything he had ever encountered in his years of fieldwork. Now, the task at hand was to bring the puppy back from the brink. Inside his cabin, the warm glow of a small fire provided comfort as Jack mixed a solution of warm water and sugar, hoping to hydrate the weak puppy. He gently coaxed the puppy to drink, though it was hesitant and barely able to swallow. Jack worked carefully, using all his knowledge to bring the puppy back to life, his steady hands making small, reassuring movements. Rusty, his old Labrador, watched from the corner of the room, his eyes soft with understanding. He had been with Jack through many strange encounters, but this one was unique. Jack continued to tend to the puppy, warming it with a soft blanket and giving it more fluids, checking for signs of improvement. As the day passed, Jack could see small improvements. The puppy's once glassy eyes began to focus, and its tail twitched slightly in response to Jack's touch. It was a slow recovery, but the puppy was a fighter. Jack knew he had to be patient. It would take time, but the puppy would survive. "You're going to be okay," Jack whispered as he sat beside the puppy, watching it rest peacefully for the first time since its abandonment. "I'll make sure of it."